Finally, we reach part 3 of the series, helping students learn and internalize the legislative process. So it is never too early to start teaching kids the legislative process. Of course, we want to be mindful of age-appropriate lessons, but I think if you're an early childhood educator like myself, you will find that early childhood children have a high capacity to learn even somewhat complex subject matters. And as future voters and current constituents of our state legislature, children have, I believe, the right to know what the legislative process entails. So the following information is going to be information on how to teach early childhood children the legislative process. The lesson plans that I will review with you all in this segment are geared mainly towards second graders, but you can tailor these lessons to be more appropriate for younger or older children as you so wish. So we're now on slide 17, and I'm sure will come as no surprise that I recommend a hands-on learning approach to teaching students how the legislative process works. And again, as I mentioned before, students can benefit from learning about this process regardless of their age. I would highly recommend doing some background lessons to teach them a little bit about how the process works, culminating with a full day mock legislature or a multi-day activity where each step is highlighted, and then they get to participate in mini versions of the legislature. So recently I did this with a group of 5 second grade classrooms at a local elementary school. And the original intent was for all 5 classes to convene for their second grade wide mock legislature outdoors, but the weather and torrential downpour flooding forced us to kind of scrap that idea, and so we did mini mock legislatures in multiple classes, and the kids really loved it. This is a complex process when you get into the thick of it, and so of course we did more high level, but the level of analytical discussion was quite impressive. And I think that you probably, as I have found many times in the past, have observed that if you give students material and open up the floor to them and get out of their way, magic happens. So I think this process is no exception to that. So in the following slides, we'll go over some high-level lesson plans, and of course, these are free for you to tweak as you see fit moving forward. Okay, moving on to slide 18. So there are several objectives to this mock legislature process. Some of those are related to just the legislative process and the social studies piece of that. However, there is so much more you can do with the mock legislative process. So one of the second grade teachers I worked with in presenting these lessons did a great job of reviewing some of the mathematical components. So we have the majority and the supermajority pieces that really promoted a really healthy and robust mathematical discussion. And one thing that I will provide a link to and that I utilized in this multi-day activity with these second grade classes is I recorded a student version of what we did in part 1, basically a description of the legislative process at a second grade level. And I shared that video with those second grade teachers in advance, and they shared them with their classes. And so we had a pretty strong foundation when I came in to start the mock legislative process. And I also created little mini student cheat sheets with a high-level overview of the process, and I will include that in the appendices of the slide deck as well. But part of that video talked a few times about the majority and what a majority means, and that it's more than half, and that most committee and floor work require a majority of yes votes for the bill to pass on to the next part of the process. So that mathematical piece is just a natural integration of another subject into this, what people would probably perceive on the surface as a social studies lesson. So there are multiple subjects, like I said, that you can integrate into this lesson. So I will not insult your intelligence by reading every one of these objectives, but at a high level, it's again that mathematical integration, just the legislative process in general, and really that higher level thinking piece where you analyze a piece of legislation and you have a robust discussion where students are not going to see eye to eye on all of the bills, and that's another thing that I have provided in the appendices is a list of these second grade level bills, if you will, for student discussion, and then a list of questions that will prompt robust discussion. If kids are having a hard time coming up with their own questions or discussion starters, those questions can kind of serve as an example or a catalyst to that robust discussion between the students. So that higher level analyzation of the bills. And then, of course, at the end, they have to make a decision and they have to vote. How we did it in the mock legislature with these students was I took like tongue depressors and I got those little, 30 or 40 cent felt squares and cut them up into little tiny squares, and I hot glued a green one to one end and I hot glued a red one to the other end. And if they wanted to vote yes or aye for a bill, then they would hold up their green end of their stick. And if they wanted to vote no or nay, they would hold up the red end of their stick. And it was, I'm going to say, magical to see the students really stick up for the vote they wanted to cast, regardless of what their peers were doing around them. And most of them did not succumb to any sort of peer pressure, even the ones that were like outlier voters. And the rest of the class were kind of looking at them crazy, like, you voted no or you voted yes. They really, and they always had a reason why they voted that way. And it also helps see who's voting from a more altruistic viewpoint, or who may have had life experiences in the past that make them more internally focused. So that was very interesting. Another thing on slide 18 you'll find is a description of activities. Certainly you can add to, you can take away, but I would definitely encourage you to have kids draft their own bills, or at least come up with the ideas for you to draft something with them. Those examples that I give, you're certainly welcome to use those. But for those of you who are in the early childhood classroom every single day and have a little bit more time to spend with the students, I'm sure that they can come up with some great ideas for bills. And as a matter of fact, one of the second grade teachers, after I left, emailed and said that, they really enjoyed the activity. They were going to figure out how to incorporate that into their daily classroom activities. And he just needed to figure out how to find things to vote on. But I am certain with the group of students that I worked with that are in his classroom, I'm certain they will help him come up with those activities as well. So getting to experience firsthand how the democratic process is intended to work, you can't go wrong teaching kids that even at a young age. So on slide 19, you'll see that there are some assessment recommendations for each objective. Of course, we can't have objectives without assessments because we have to have a way, of course, to measure what students have learned. There are many more assessments and objectives that we could add. I'm not even sure. I don't recall if I have anything about the majority piece. But there would be some great ways to test some of the math skills in there. Pretty easy to assess on that end. And so with that, we are coming to the end of part 3. But like I said, please review the appendices, use those as you see fit. And if you need any more guidance or have questions, or want any additional information, or again, need help navigating that state legislature site, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is K as in kite, teach, Teach, joy, @gmail.com. And I've included a link to a survey at the end of the slide deck. If you wouldn't mind, please clicking on that link and providing some feedback so that I can help teachers moving forward with advocacy, understanding the legislative process, helping in their classroom, and tailor trainings to meet the needs of early childhood teachers. And with that, thank you and have a great rest of your year.